So the last type of function we're going to talk about today are quadratic functions and finding inverses of those. So here, again, still we're going to find the inverse of the function and graph both functions and verify the inverse on the graph. So what I have is a quadratic function here, negative x squared plus 6. So what I can do is exactly what we've been doing, finding inverses, is rewrite this as y equals negative x squared plus 6, switch the x and the y, so x equals negative y squared plus 6. We need to solve for y, so I'm going to subtract 6 from both sides, so I have x minus 6 equals negative y squared. I have to get rid of this negative 1, so I'm going to divide everything here by negative 1, so I have negative x plus 6 equals y squared. And how do we undo a square? With a square root, so I take the square root of both sides. So now I have the square root of negative x plus 6 equals, and don't forget, when I take the square root of something, I need plus or minus y. But I can't have plus or minus y there, so if I divide both of these sides by plus or minus, we're just kind of going to move it over to the other side. So plus or minus the square root of x plus 6, negative x plus 6 equals y. So I have my inverse function, the inverse of x equals plus or minus the square root of negative x plus 6. Now, we need to graph both of these functions. So let's go back to our original function here, which is it's quadratic. What we know is that, okay, it's going to open down because it's negative, and that my y-intercept is 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But what I don't know are what points I have on either side. So I'm just going to make a quick XY chart, and I'm just going to plug in. I already plugged in 0, so let's plug in negative 1 and positive 1, and we're just going to get a rough sketch of a parabola here. So when I plug in negative 1, I have negative 1 squared is 1. The opposite of that is negative 1. Negative 1 plus 6 is 5. Here, when I plug in 1 squared is 1. The opposite of that is negative 1 plus 6 is 5. Oh, we had 0, 6. So this is what my parabola looks like here. So here, here's my parabola. All right. Now, we have not talked about graphing square root functions. So how am I going to graph the inverse of this when we don't actually know how? Well, what do I know about the inverse? I know that these ordered pairs should be backwards, right? So I'm just going to write the inverse of the ordered pairs. So when x is here, when x is 5, y will be negative 1. When x is 6, y should be 0. When x is 5, I should also have 1 here. Now, that's going to be a little tricky, or not. Let's just graph them. So 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, negative 1. Here we go. Then I have 6, 0. So 6, 0 is right there. And then I have 5, 1. So here, now I can draw, it's a sideways parabola. And it looks like this. So if I put in my line, my dashed line of y equals x here, look what's happening. If I fold this over on itself, my graphs are mirror images of each other. Okay, I want you to graph one quadratic function and its inverse.